On March 11th and 12th, 2022, I made my first visit to Carowinds, and it was quite the trip. After making the trek to the park, and seemingly playing Frogger with every 18-wheeler and Jersey driver in existence, I pulled up to my first ever Passholder preview day that just so happened to be at one of my top bucket list parks. Upon arriving, the first thing I noticed, besides the obvious towering 325-foot Giga Coaster right in front of me, was how beautiful and well kept this park was. Outside of my home park at Six Flags Over Georgia, the only parks I visited are Dollywood and the Florida parks, so I hadn't visited another park in that more corporate chain realm to have any sort of scope as to what I was supposed to be expecting. This front entrance blew me away, and it really does set the tone for the rest of your day. Security was a breeze both days I visited the park, and I was able to hop on Intimidator 15 minutes before the park had officially opened, which is always a huge perk, especially when you get on the first train of the season. This was of course after I tried to ride Nighthawk when I was greeted with the unfortunate "Ride will not operate today" sign. But that's okay, there's always tomorrow, right? Wrong. I later noticed that there wasn't even a train on the tracks, and heard from others at the park later on in the day that it would remain closed for a while, so I knew I would have to return for that credit. Sadness. From Intimidator, I made my way over to Copperhead Strike. I really didn't know what crowds would look like. This was my first Passholder preview day, so I had no clue what was in store crowd-wise or with operations in general. So I wanted to knock out some of my most anticipated coasters first that could potentially get nasty waits, ride the credit and forget it's, and then let the Fury crew work their magic for the rest of the night. Intimidator was assigning rows, so I got stuck near the middle of the train, which makes it pretty hard to judge. I almost found myself feeling bad for this coaster, because it could easily be a number one at 80% of the parks in America, but it's stuck right in the front of the park next to one of the greatest coasters ever built. And it gets memed quite hard for its trims and layout in general. I haven't ridden it enough to give it a fair shake yet, but it was still a lot of fun. Copperhead Strike was probably my biggest winner of the year as far as expectations go. I had heard mixed reviews in that it was considered a weak ride by some, but I couldn't disagree more. I was actually shocked at how intense this ride was, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Until I started feeling sick. Yup, if you watch my SeaWorld video, you're already well aware, but I can get motion sickness pretty badly, and I felt it hit pretty quick this day. I was able to get back-to-back rides on Intimidator and Copperhead Strike, without having to get off of either, and this all happened within probably 15 minutes of each other, which was not wise pacing on my part, at all. But I hadn't ridden a new coaster in basically 6-7 months, so I did it anyways. So what did I do next? Took a break, right? Wrong.
Wrong again!
Straight to Afterburn. All gas, no brakes.
No! God, please, no!
Now that was dumb. But I survived that, and then took a little photo break before moving on to what I anticipated to be the one-hitter quitters of the park. I found Afterburn to be the most intense coaster in the park, so that should be right up the alley of you positive G-Force junkies out there. Given my fondness for airtime and the then current state of my vestibular and gastrointestinal systems, I tolerated it. But I look forward to giving it re-rides in the future. It's definitely in the top 4 to 5 at the park. I then moved on to check out Camp Snoopy since it was nearby and had 2 of the more tame coasters in the park, in Woodstock Express and Wilderness Run. I stopped by Woodstock Express first and was super intrigued to ride my first of these clones. It could definitely use a little retracking, but I found that this little machine had better airtime than Hurler. It's a little hard to fit for taller guests, but then again, full-grown enthusiasts aren't really its target audience, so I can't complain much there. I unfortunately noticed from the lift hill that Wilderness Run was not operating. But again, not really the target audience here. How upset can I really get over that? I will admit that these E&F kiddie coasters are a guilty pleasure of mine though. I came away super impressed by Camp Snoopy, and I really hope other parks will follow suit by sprucing up their kiddie and family sections in the future. I walked out of Camp Snoopy and saw that there was a short wait for Kitty Hawk. I had heard absolutely terrible things about this coaster, but I found myself thinking, how bad could this be? It's only a family coaster.
You idiot!
I ended up riding very defensively after that first turn. I think my height helped me here as most of my head was above the restraint. But as the screams of agony from the rest of the train indicated, this is a very rough ride, and the restraints do it no favors. After surviving my Be Brave challenge in Kitty Hawk, next up was another Vekoma gem, Flying Cobras, my first Vekoma boomerang. and I rode it once again with blatant disregard for the nausea I was feeling. That was probably the most disoriented I've ever felt getting off of a coaster. Nothing much else to say here. Super short, intense ride, and the backwards loop was a lot of fun. Oh, and thank God for those vest restraints. Now that I had completely destroyed my stomach, I decided to wait in the long line that had started to form for Ricochet, which was stacking probably 3 to 4 cars in the brake run. I was completely okay with this though, as I wanted to try to give myself a break. And then it happened. It started raining. As Airtime Thrills said it best, death, taxes, rained at Carowinds. And apparently Ricochet shuts down with even the slightest drizzle of rain, which occurred about 10 minutes after I got in line. I was originally planning on riding this first thing in the day, but decided against it. And that totally came back to bite me. Whatever, just a wild mess at the end of the day. Now that I was feeling better, it was on to Carolina Cyclone. This is where I noticed a bit of a bizarre practice with the ride ops. Keep in mind that this was Passholder preview night, so the park wasn't that busy. But this, along with Vortex, were running multiple trains. However, one was being used to train ride ops, and they weren't loading any passengers and sending them empty. It's great that they're receiving proper training, but I just found it a little weird that this was happening in front of guests and not at another time. Maybe this is a common practice in the theme park industry. I don't know. I wasn't upset by this, I just found it a little weird. Carolina Cyclone recently received a new paint job, as well as trains for Vortex at Kings Island, so the park obviously has plans of keeping it around. I think the ride's got serious potential, it just needs new trains or at least new restraints. I got snapped into those things with every single transition. After getting pretty wet riding Carolina Cyclone and seeing Ricochet go down for the weather, I got a little antsy to make sure I was able to ride Fury 325, as it was going to be frigid the following morning. So I headed over there as soon as I got off of Carolina Cyclone. Park Pros recently uploaded a video where he coined the term PRC, which stands for Park Redeeming Coaster, and I couldn't think of a better way to sum up Fury. After riding so many of the park's lower tier coasters back to back to back, this is a nice way to motivate me to finish off the rest of them so I can marathon Fury the rest of the night. So that's exactly what I did. I thoroughly enjoyed Fury, but knew that I needed re-rides to judge it further. 3 coasters were standing in my way of 2 straight hours of Fury 325. Hurler, Vortex, and Carolina Gold Rusher. The last of which I knew nothing about. Hurler recently got the first half of the ride retracked, and it runs about as smooth as the Woody possibly can. The airtime, as I stated earlier, is super weak, but I found the ride to be a lot of fun. The second half is very rough, but as the park continues giving it the same attention that it deserves, this definitely has its place in the park. I definitely think the park needs an RMC, but Hurler is kinda alright in my book, and I wasn't expecting to say that. I wouldn't be distraught either way. I rode Vortex next, and with as positive as I try to be about coasters, this thing just needs to be scrapped. I don't think the layout is strong enough for a floorless conversion. If there's a way to make it stand up more comfortable, then sure, but until then, I'm on team tear it down. I will say though, the ride has a beautiful setting. When Nighthawk inevitably bites the dust, these two could leave room for one heck of an addition. I rounded out the remaining open credits with Carolina Gold Rusher, which is a wonderful change of pace. I found this thing to be a surprisingly smooth mine train with a pretty relaxing layout. It's essentially everything that I wish the Dahlonega mine train was. And just like that, it was time for a Fury Night Ride Marathon. I managed to get multiple front row and back row rides, and while I thoroughly enjoy both, the front is unlike anything I have ever experienced. You just get every ounce of speed up there that just isn't the same everywhere else on the train. However, beware, riding Fury in the rain up front is an experience. Rain bouncing off of your face while you're going 95 miles per hour is pretty painful. I'm going to save further analysis for when I give Fury its own video in the near future, but I ended up with 8 rides in total, and it was an experience that I'm never going to forget. It wasn't just the ride itself or the rain that made this marathon so memorable though. I ended up getting to chat with another couple of enthusiasts, and one of them ended up mentioning Dr. Coaster. You can imagine the look on my face. Totally taken aback, I showed them my YouTube and Instagram pages to prove that it was me, and I was able to ride Fury twice more with them. Nothing like this has ever happened since creating this channel, and it was something that was truly special. You guys know who you are, and I can't wait to ride coasters with you again in the future. I couldn't have dreamt of a better way to conclude the first night of the trip. Knowing that it was going to be a chilly one, I bundled up and headed to the park the next morning. The plan was to re-ride Intimidator, Fury 325, and maybe Copperhead Strike, followed by a photo lap. Oh, and hopefully a redemption ride on Ricochet. This would allow me to leave the park before the temperature tanked even further. Sadly, almost none of this went to plan. Fury, closed. Ricochet, closed. Intimidator, closed. I got so desperate I even went to go check on Wilderness Run, but it was also closed. I was fortunate enough to get back on Copperhead Strike and get a semi-productive photo lap before making the call to leave early and head home. It ended up being the right call. Carowinds decided to close the park early that day due to the weather. While it wasn't the ending of the trip that I had hoped for, I still had an incredible time and rode 11 new coasters, with Fury firmly planting itself in my top 3. If you haven't visited Carowinds before, I strongly recommend that you make your way out to the park to check it out for yourself. Fury 225 is worth it on its own. Thank you all for watching, and for getting me to 300 subscribers on the channel. That was my first ever visit to Carowinds. I haven't spent enough time in the park to drop a full review quite yet, but I hope to do that later this year. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that and other theme park and coaster content just like this. Also be sure to follow me over on Instagram, where you can find me at Dr_Coaster. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.